Hey Linewalkers, this is Jaime A. Heidel, the Articulate Autistic, and I have a brand new video for you today. This one is called Why Autistic People Do That, video 35. We have no intuitive concept of social hierarchy. So this is something that I wrote about on my Facebook page, which is the Articulate Autistic, and if you haven't seen it, I will link it below, or you might be watching this on Facebook now. Social hierarchy is not something that comes naturally to autistic people. And when I say that, I mean that an autistic person or a neurodiverse person will usually not understand that there's a certain way that you're socially expected to speak to a CEO of a company versus the janitor of a company. Or there's a socially appropriate way that you're expected to speak to a police officer versus your best friend. Or a clergyman versus somebody that you go to church with. And this can cause a lot of problems in NT to ND, neurotypical to neurodiverse, communication, because these are, I think, aspects of social communication that come completely naturally for people who are not on the spectrum. I think that this must be picked up in some way just through social learning, which is not something that we intuitively as autistic people understand. Now, this isn't to say that we can't learn these social hierarchy, social cues to understand, when we talk to our boss, we have to use a certain tone and act a certain way, versus when we talk to our coworkers, we should be using a certain tone and talking a certain way. And I think that can get a lot of people who are on the spectrum in trouble with the law. Definitely can get us in trouble with our bosses or our teachers or clergymen, anybody who is considered socially above, not above us, but above anybody. And this is really hard for me to explain, because I don't really have a complete grasp on social hierarchy. I do understand intellectually why that would be important, but at the same time, it's not natural for me. So when I think about, if you're talking to a senator, you're supposed to have a certain type of respect for that senator. Even if you don't know him, you don't agree with his politics, you've never voted for him, you've never even heard of him. Just the fact that he's a senator in the neurotypical world, just because he's a senator means you are automatically expected to treat him with respect. And sometimes with deference, meaning you sort of, I'm not sure if I can explain deference. Excuse me, sorry about that. I'm not sure if I can explain deference. Ooh, somebody help me. Somebody explain deference. It's sort of a way of showing subservience. This is so hard. So anyway, social hierarchy is just not a concept that we know automatically. Unless somebody had told us, if you're talking to a teacher or you're talking to a senator or a mayor or whatever, you're supposed to speak a certain way, or you're socially expected to speak that way, we would not know that. So I think that there's a lot of misinterpretation there that someone is being rude if they're on the spectrum because they treat their grandmother the same way they would treat their cousin, the same way they would treat their teacher, the same way they would treat their priest or anything like that. People on the spectrum, we talk to everybody as though they're completely equal. And while in theory, that's actually quite a nice way, I think, of viewing the world, that everybody's equal, it can also cause serious problems because if you're a neurotypical person and you're not aware that a person's on the spectrum, you could mistakenly think that the autistic person is trying to mock you or treat you in a certain way or disrespect you. And that's not what's happening. We're just not, unless we're taught, we're just not aware that we're expected to talk different ways to different people. It's just not something that's either intuitively ingrained in us or something that we pick up on by watching other people socialize. So I think that's really important. I know that if you ever have gotten pulled over, if you're on the spectrum and you've ever gotten pulled over for speeding or for having a tail light out or something like that, I know it's probably an incredibly, incredibly nerve-wracking procedure for you. Or it could have been that you just thought of the police officer as your friend or any other person and, talked to him maybe in a joking way and it was taken the wrong way. So I'm sure there are horror stories, and I know that things can get a lot worse than that, a lot worse. There are autistic people who have been inadvertently killed by police for just being autistic. And that's something that I wanted to address because I think there needs to be more training around this, around understanding that, especially someone who may be on the spectrum who is younger or maybe hasn't learned these social cues or just isn't really capable of integrating that into their way of life. I think it can be especially dangerous because the person isn't able, especially if they're afraid and they're going into a meltdown or a shutdown. Autistic behaviors, just natural autistic behaviors, can look very suspicious to someone in authority. And honestly, I think that's probably a topic for another video, but they're not suspicious behaviors to us. We may look away, we may not make eye contact, we may stutter and stammer. And that can cause a feeling of, oh, she or he must be guilty of something when we're not. So I think that can cause annoying social interactions or confusing social interactions, but it can also cause serious problems. And if a person on the spectrum is not aware that they should talk to their boss a certain way, they may be passed over for promotions, they may be talked about and ridiculed in the office, they may be fired from their job and never given any reason for why this has happened. And I think that mistakenly, a lot of people who are neurotypical tend to think that the autistic person knows what they've done. No, definitely not. When it comes to not understanding social hierarchy, that isn't a purposeful behavior. It's just, this is something we have to learn. Just like you had to learn math and social studies and English and history. We have to learn these social ways of being in order to not stick out like a sore thumb and not, inadvertently disrespect someone. And that isn't to say I think all autistic people should change the way they are, but I make these videos so that people can understand why this happens and that there's another reason why somebody may be speaking to you in a way you think is disrespectful when that's not their intention. So I think that's very important to remember, that autistic people, as a rule, we usually do not understand social hierarchy. We can learn it, but it's not something that we feel intuitively. So if you know an autistic person and you happen to be in a position of power, say, you are a mayor or a senator or a teacher or, a position in power of other people where there's people beneath you, which I hate using beneath you, but you know what I mean. If that's the case, I would definitely make sure that you're not talking to somebody who is autistic or neurodiverse or on the spectrum before you have a reaction that's, before you have a reaction, just make sure you know what kind of neurotype of person you're talking to, because it's very easy to assume that someone's being disrespectful of you when that's not what's happening at all. So I'm going to end this there, and I might do another video about how police can be better aware of autistic people. Although I know there's plenty of training programs going on, I might want to do a video about that just in case. So that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.